Maya, you're out of your league here. This is how real business gets done. Board Chairman Theodore Whitman pushes the acquisition documents away from Maya Johnson's hands. The conference room falls silent as cameras roll for the investor call. Maya, CEO of Aurora Financial Group, straightens her shoulders. She's been preparing for this moment her entire career. Theodore, you just cost our shareholders $15 billion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Johnson arrives at Aurora Financial Group's Manhattan headquarters before dawn, as she has every day for the past 3 years. The 40-story glass tower reflects the early morning light across Wall Street, a monument to the investment banking empire she built from the ground up. Her corner office overlooks the Hudson River, but Maya rarely admires the view. Today marks the most crucial board meeting in Aurora's history. The acquisition of Premier Asset Management represents the culmination of Maya's 5-year strategic vision. The $8.7 billion deal would create the largest minority-owned financial services company in American history, managing over $340 billion in assets. Maya discovered Premier's vulnerabilities 18 months ago when their founder's health declined and succession planning failed. While other investment banks circled like vultures, Maya structured a deal that preserved Premier's client relationships while expanding Aurora's reach into institutional asset management. Maya's assistant, Jennifer, brings her the final negotiation summaries. The documents represent hundreds of hours of due diligence, regulatory preparation, and client retention strategies. Maya built Aurora through methodical analysis and relationship building, never through the aggressive tactics that dominated Wall Street's old guard. Her approach attracted institutional clients who valued stability over flash, pension funds and endowments that required fiduciary responsibility rather than speculative gambling. The boardroom begins filling an hour before the scheduled meeting. Maya watches through her office glass as directors take their seats around the mahogany table. Most arrived through her careful recruitment over the past 4 years, as Aurora's success demanded expanded governance. She selected accomplished professionals who understood both finance and corporate responsibility, individuals who could guide Aurora's growth without compromising its ethical foundation. Theodore Whitman enters last, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 72, he carries himself with the authority of someone who controlled financial institutions when Maya was still in elementary school. His silver hair perfectly styled, his suit tailored by London's finest craftsmen, Theodore embodies old Wall Street aristocracy. He joined Aurora's board 2 years ago when his private equity firm invested $200 million in Aurora's expansion. The investment came with board representation and Theodore's decades of experience navigating complex financial mergers. Maya appreciates Theodore's institutional knowledge, while recognizing the generational divide between their approaches. He built wealth through leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers during the 1980s and 1990s, acquiring companies to strip assets and eliminate redundancies. Maya built Aurora through client service and operational excellence, growing organically while maintaining employment and community relationships. Their philosophical differences never created open conflict, but tension simmered beneath board discussions about Aurora's direction. The Premier acquisition represents their starkest disagreement yet. Theodore advocates for a more aggressive approach, suggesting Aurora leverage Premier's distressed position to negotiate steeper discounts and impose harsher restructuring terms. Maya constructed the deal to preserve Premier's workforce and client relationships, viewing long-term stability as more valuable than short-term cost savings. She believes Aurora's success stems from treating acquisitions as partnerships rather than conquests. As the meeting begins, Maya presents the final acquisition terms to the assembled directors. Her PowerPoint slides outline Premier's asset portfolio, client demographics, and integration timeline. The financial projections show steady growth over 5 years, with Aurora's combined entity generating $2.8 billion in annual revenue by year 3. Conservative estimates project 15% annual growth in assets under management, driven by client retention and Aurora's expanded service capabilities. Theodore interrupts her presentation repeatedly, questioning assumptions and challenging projections. His tone carries condescension that makes other directors uncomfortable, but Maya maintains professional composure. She addresses each concern with specific data and market analysis, demonstrating the depth of her preparation. The acquisition creates natural synergies between Aurora's retail wealth management and Premier's institutional services, eliminating overlaps while expanding both client bases. The regulatory environment favors the transaction. Federal banking authorities encourage consolidation among mid-sized financial institutions, viewing larger entities as more stable during economic volatility. Maya structured the deal to satisfy regulatory requirements while maintaining Aurora's status as a certified minority business enterprise. This designation provides competitive advantages in government and institutional contracts, relationships that Theodore's traditional approach might jeopardize. Maya's presentation concludes with integration timelines and leadership structures. She plans to retain Premier's senior management team, recognizing their client relationships as irreplaceable assets. The combined company would maintain dual headquarters in New York and Chicago, preserving Premier's Midwestern client base while expanding Aurora's national presence. Employee retention bonuses ensure continuity during the transition period, preventing competitors from poaching talent during vulnerable integration phases. Theodore's questions become increasingly aggressive as Maya outlines her plans. He challenges her decision to retain Premier's leadership, suggesting that Aurora should impose its own management structure to ensure control. Maya explains that Premier's clients chose their firm specifically for its leadership team's expertise and approach. Replacing established relationships with Aurora personnel would likely trigger client departures, undermining the acquisition's strategic value.
The discussion reveals Theodore's fundamental misunderstanding of Aurora's business model. He views financial services as commodity transactions, where clients respond primarily to pricing and returns. Maya built Aurora around relationship-based service delivery, where clients value personal attention and customized solutions. Premier's institutional clients require sophisticated asset allocation strategies and risk management services that depend heavily on trust and communication with specific individuals. Theodore's frustration becomes visible as other board members ask detailed questions about client retention strategies and integration costs. Maya answers each inquiry with specific examples and supporting documentation, demonstrating her comprehensive understanding of both companies' operations. Her responses reveal months of careful planning and stakeholder consultation, work that Theodore apparently failed to review despite receiving all materials weeks in advance. The tension escalates when Theodore challenges Maya's projected timeline for regulatory approval. He suggests that Aurora could accelerate the process through his political connections, implying that Maya's methodical approach reflects inexperience with complex transactions. Maya calmly explains that rushing regulatory review could trigger additional scrutiny and conditions, potentially jeopardizing the entire transaction. Her conservative timeline builds in contingencies for unexpected delays or requirements. Other directors begin supporting Maya's approach as her presentation continues. The financial projections prove conservative compared to industry benchmarks, suggesting upside potential beyond her baseline assumptions. The integration costs appear reasonable given the transaction's complexity and size. Maya's retention strategies address the primary risks that typically derail financial services mergers, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of sector-specific challenges. Theodore's isolation becomes apparent as board discussion progresses. His objections focus on maximizing short-term returns rather than building sustainable competitive advantages. Other directors recognize that Maya's approach aligns with Aurora's historical success in market positioning. The company thrived by prioritizing client relationships over transaction volume, building lasting value through service excellence rather than aggressive sales tactics. Maya concludes her presentation by addressing the board's fiduciary responsibilities. The Premier acquisition strengthens Aurora's market position while generating returns consistent with shareholders' risk tolerance and return expectations. Alternative strategies carry higher execution risks and potential regulatory complications. Her recommendation reflects careful analysis of available options and their likely outcomes under various market scenarios. The formal vote approaches as directors request final clarifications about specific deal terms and integration milestones. Maya's confidence in her preparation shows through detailed responses that anticipate potential complications and mitigation strategies. She built consensus among institutional investors and regulatory contacts before presenting to the board, ensuring external support for the transaction's completion. Theodore's body language signals his growing frustration with the proceedings. His questions become shorter and more pointed, suggesting he recognizes the board's momentum toward approving Maya's recommendation. The other directors clearly respect her expertise and track record, having witnessed Aurora's growth under her leadership over the past 3 years. Maya remains focused on the business case rather than personal dynamics. She built Aurora to serve clients while generating sustainable returns for investors. The Premier acquisition advances both objectives while maintaining Aurora's ethical standards and community commitments. Success requires executing her integration plan methodically rather than imposing radical changes that could destabilize client relationships. The board discussion reaches its conclusion as directors prepare for the formal vote. Maya's presentation successfully addressed their concerns while demonstrating her comprehensive preparation and strategic thinking. The acquisition represents a natural evolution of Aurora's growth strategy, building on established strengths rather than pursuing unfamiliar business models or markets. The formal vote begins with each director stating their position on the Premier acquisition. Maya maintains neutral expressions as support builds systematically around the table. Director Patricia Williams, former Treasury Department official, endorses the conservative integration approach. Director Robert Chen, who built 3 successful regional banks, praises Maya's client retention strategies. Director Angela Rodriguez, Harvard Business School professor, commends the thorough regulatory analysis. Theodore watches his influence diminish with each supportive statement. His jaw tightens when Director James Foster, recruited through Theodore's own recommendation last year, votes to approve Maya's proposal. The tally reaches 6 votes in favor before Theodore finally speaks. "This is exactly what I expected from this board," Theodore announces, his voice cutting through the boardroom's professional atmosphere. "You're all so impressed by buzzwords and presentation graphics that you've forgotten how real deals get structured." Maya feels the temperature in the room shift. Other directors exchange glances, uncomfortable with Theodore's tone, but uncertain how to respond. Theodore stands from his chair, his height allowing him to look down at Maya despite her position at the head of the table. "Maya, you've built a nice little boutique firm here, but Premier represents big league finance. This isn't about relationship building and hand-holding. This is about extracting maximum value from a distressed asset before competitors figure out what we're doing." Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Director Williams interjects diplomatically. "Theodore, Maya's projections account for competitive pressures and market conditions. Her approach appears both thorough and realistic." Theodore dismisses Williams with a wave. "Patricia, you spent your career in government regulation. You don't understand how private markets actually function." He turns back toward Maya. "The problem here is leadership that's more concerned with appearing collaborative than making difficult decisions." Maya responds calmly. "Theodore, our success at Aurora comes from building sustainable value rather than extracting short-term profits. Premier's clients chose them for specific reasons that we need to preserve." "Preserve what? A bunch of pension fund managers who can't generate returns above treasury bills?" Theodore's voice rises. "We should be restructuring Premier's entire operation, not coddling underperforming portfolio managers who hide behind relationship excuses." The boardroom falls silent. Theodore's attack on Premier's management team reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of institutional asset management.
Pension funds and endowments require steady, predictable returns rather than high-risk speculation. Aurora's clients specifically chose the firm because Maya understood their fiduciary obligations and risk constraints. Director Chen attempts to redirect the discussion. Theodore, perhaps we could examine specific aspects of the integration plan that concern you. Maya's team has prepared detailed analysis of each business line. Robert, the analysis is fine. The leadership is the problem. Theodore remains standing, using his physical presence to dominate the room. Maya's never managed an acquisition of this scale. She's never dealt with the regulatory complexity of combining two major financial institutions. Her entire career has been building one company from scratch, not integrating established operations. Maya maintains eye contact with Theodore while addressing the board. My experience includes 3 years as Deputy Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. I reviewed and approved integration plans for 14 financial services mergers totaling over $40 billion in combined assets. Theodore pauses, clearly unaware of Maya's regulatory background. Other directors lean forward, interested in details Maya rarely discussed during board meetings. She built Aurora's reputation through results rather than credentials, letting performance speak for her expertise. Federal Reserve experience doesn't translate to private sector execution. Government oversight is completely different from managing shareholders and competitive pressures. Academic analysis doesn't prepare you for the real-world complications that arise during complex integrations. Director Rodriguez speaks up. Theodore, Maya's track record at Aurora demonstrates her ability to execute complex strategies under competitive pressure. The firm has exceeded performance targets every quarter for 3 consecutive years. Angela, Aurora's growth came during the longest bull market in history. Any competent manager could generate returns in that environment. Theodore's dismissal carries unmistakable condescension. Real leadership gets tested during difficult conditions, not when markets rise automatically. Maya recognizes Theodore's strategy. He's systematically undermining her credibility by questioning her experience, her decision-making capability, and her understanding of market dynamics. His approach follows a familiar pattern from her early career when senior executives dismissed her expertise despite superior preparation and results. Theodore, Aurora's performance exceeded benchmark indices during both the 2020 market correction and the 2022 inflation concerns. Our client retention rate during volatile periods demonstrates the strength of our relationship-based approach. Client retention doesn't matter if you're not generating alpha for investors, Theodore counters. Pension funds and endowments choose Aurora because you charge lower fees, not because you deliver superior returns. That's not sustainable competitive advantage. That's price competition that erodes margins over time. Director Foster, who built his reputation managing university endowments, shakes his head. Theodore, that analysis misses the fundamental value proposition in institutional asset management. Consistent performance with controlled risk generates better long-term outcomes than chasing high returns with excessive volatility. Theodore turns his attention to Foster. James, you've been retired from active management for 5 years. Current market conditions require more aggressive strategies than the conservative approaches that worked in previous decades. Maya watches Theodore isolate himself from every other board member through personal attacks disguised as strategic disagreements. His behavior reveals desperation rather than confidence, suggesting he recognizes his position's weakness but lacks alternative arguments. Theodore, Premier's management team includes some of the most respected professionals in institutional asset management. Our due diligence identified their expertise as a primary asset driving client loyalty and performance consistency. Maya, you're being naive about personnel decisions. Successful acquisitions require leadership changes that align acquired companies with new strategic directions. Sentiment and loyalty don't generate returns for shareholders. The mask slips further as Theodore's frustration becomes visible. His arguments lack supporting analysis and rely increasingly on assertions about Maya's inexperience and inadequate understanding of financial markets. Other directors notice the shift from substantive policy disagreements to personal characterizations. Director Williams attempts to restore professional discourse. Perhaps we should focus on specific integration challenges and potential solutions rather than broad strategic philosophy differences. Theodore ignores Williams entirely. The fundamental issue here is that Maya has never run a major financial institution. Aurora is essentially a family business that grew into regional significance. Premier represents national-scale operations with complex regulatory requirements and sophisticated client expectations. Maya's composure remains steady despite Theodore's escalating attacks. She built Aurora precisely because she understood that traditional Wall Street approaches often failed to serve clients effectively. Her success came from rejecting the aggressive, transaction-focused culture that Theodore represents. Aurora manages $34 billion in assets across institutional and retail client segments. Our regulatory compliance record is exemplary, and our operational systems support the scale required for Premier integration. $34 billion sounds impressive until you compare it to Premier's current operations or the major players will compete against post-merger. Scale creates complexity that you haven't experienced yet. Director Chen attempts intervention again. Maya's presentation addressed scalability concerns through phased integration and parallel system operations during transition periods. Her approach appears designed to manage precisely those complexity issues. Theodore's response reveals his growing isolation. Robert, you're all missing the bigger picture here. This acquisition represents Aurora's best opportunity to establish a major market presence, but only if we execute aggressively. Conservative approaches leave competitive openings that other firms will exploit. Maya recognizes that Theodore's arguments increasingly contradict established best practices for financial services integration. His push for aggressive restructuring suggests he views Premier as a traditional private equity target rather than a strategic asset requiring careful cultivation. Our analysis shows that aggressive cost-cutting during integration typically triggers client departures that offset short-term savings. Premier's value lies in its established relationships and proven performance, not in operational efficiencies we could extract through restructuring. Theodore, you're thinking like a small firm owner instead of a major market player. Institutional clients care about results, not relationships. If we deliver superior returns, they'll stay regardless of personnel changes or operational modifications. Director Rodriguez challenges Theodore's assertion directly. Angela, that analysis contradicts extensive academic research on institutional investor behavior. Relationship stability strongly influences client retention, particularly during ownership transitions and operational changes. Theodore's frustration reaches a visible breaking point. His carefully maintained composure cracks as every board member challenges his position or supports Maya's approach. The isolation that began with policy disagreements has evolved into complete strategic divergence. Angela, academic research doesn't capture the real dynamics of high-stakes financial decision-making. You're all operating from theoretical frameworks instead of practical experience with major market transactions. Maya observes Theodore's increasing reliance on personal authority rather than substantive arguments. His attacks on other directors' qualifications suggest he recognizes the weakness of his position but refuses to acknowledge legitimate disagreements about strategy and execution. The boardroom atmosphere grows increasingly tense as Theodore's behavior transgresses normal bounds of professional discourse. Other directors appear uncomfortable with his personal attacks, but uncertain about appropriate responses to a chairman's misconduct during formal proceedings. Maya maintains focus on the business case rather than engaging Theodore's personal challenges. Her preparation anticipated resistance to the conservative integration approach, but Theodore's behavior suggests deeper issues than strategic disagreements about Premier's acquisition and integration. The boardroom silence grows oppressive as Theodore's attacks on fellow directors cross professional boundaries. Maya watches him alienate every potential ally through increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the discussion. His behavior suggests someone who built authority through intimidation rather than expertise, facing resistance from peers unwilling to be bullied.
Director Foster finally addresses Theodore's conduct directly. "Theodore, I'm concerned about the tone of this discussion. We're here to evaluate a business proposal, not question each other's professional qualifications or experience."
Theodore whirls toward Foster, his composure completely abandoned. "James, you've been nodding along with Maya's presentation like some first-year MBA student impressed by fancy charts. This board needs directors who can think independently instead of following whatever the CEO recommends." The insult hangs in the air like toxic smoke. Foster built his reputation managing some of the nation's largest university endowments, generating consistent returns that funded scholarships and research for decades. Theodore's characterization reveals either stunning ignorance or deliberate malice designed to humiliate a respected colleague. Maya intervenes before Foster can respond. "Theodore, Director Foster's questions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of institutional asset management challenges. His experience with endowment governance directly relates to Premier's client base and operational requirements." "Maya, you don't need to defend board members who can't defend themselves." Theodore's voice drips condescension. "James asks softball questions that any intern could have raised. Real due diligence requires challenging assumptions and stress-testing projections under adverse scenarios." Director Chen stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Theodore, your behavior is completely inappropriate for a board meeting. We're discussing a significant business decision that deserves professional analysis, not personal attacks on fellow directors." Theodore turns his attention to Chen with predatory focus. "Robert, you built regional banks during economic expansion periods. That's completely different from managing major market acquisitions during current competitive conditions. Your experience doesn't translate to the scale and complexity we're discussing here." Maya recognizes the pattern now. Theodore systematically diminishes everyone's expertise while positioning himself as the only director capable of understanding complex financial transactions. His strategy relies on undermining confidence rather than providing alternative analysis or supporting evidence for his positions. "Theodore, Director Chen's experience includes 3 successful bank acquisitions, totaling over $2 billion in combined assets. His integration expertise directly applies to Premier's transaction." Maya's voice remains steady, despite her growing concern about Theodore's escalating behavior. $2 billion is pocket change compared to what we're discussing with the Premier. Maya, you keep citing small-scale precedents that don't address the real challenges of major market consolidation. Theodore moves closer to Maya's position at the head of the table, using physical proximity to create additional pressure. Director Williams watches Theodore's approach with obvious alarm. "Theodore, please return to your seat so we can continue our discussion professionally." "Patricia, I don't need seating arrangements dictated by someone who never managed private sector operations." Theodore's response reveals complete abandonment of collegial respect. Government experience creates completely different perspectives from private market decision-making. Maya stands to equalize the physical dynamic as Theodore continues his intimidation attempt. His movement draws his attention back to her, which was precisely her intention. Better to absorb his hostility than watch him attack directors who supported her position. "Theodore, Director Williams supervised merger analysis for the Federal Reserve during the 2008 financial crisis. Her experience with stressed institutional consolidations exceeds what any of us have encountered in private markets." "Maya, you keep defending everyone else's qualifications while avoiding the fundamental question about your own readiness for this acquisition." Theodore steps closer, violating normal professional space boundaries. "Aurora's success came from building relationships with small institutional clients, not managing complex integration challenges." The accusation strikes at Maya's core professional identity. She built Aurora specifically to demonstrate that relationship-focused approaches could generate superior long-term results compared to transaction-oriented strategies. Theodore's dismissal of her methodology attacks everything she accomplished over the past decade. "Theodore, Aurora's client retention rate exceeds industry averages by 18%.
Our risk-adjusted returns consistently outperform benchmark indices. The approach you're criticizing has generated the success that attracted Premier's attention in the first place. Maya, past performance doesn't guarantee future results, especially when you're attempting strategies completely outside your experience base. Theodore's voice carries an unmistakable threat. Boards have fiduciary responsibilities to replace management when leadership capabilities don't match operational requirements. The room temperature seems to drop several degrees. Theodore just threatened Maya's position as CEO during a board meeting, crossing every boundary of appropriate governance behavior. Other directors exchange shocked glances, unsure how to respond to such blatant misconduct. Maya maintains eye contact with Theodore while addressing the full board. Directors, we are discussing a strategic acquisition that strengthens Aurora's market position while preserving the client-focused culture that drives our success. The integration plan addresses identified risks through conservative timelines and proven methodologies. Maya, you can't deflect attention from leadership questions by returning to prepared talking points. Theodore's frustration boils over into visible anger. This board needs an honest assessment of whether Aurora's current management can execute acquisitions of this magnitude and complexity. Director Rodriguez finally intervenes with force. Theodore, you're completely out of line. Maya has demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities through Aurora's growth and performance. Your suggestions about management changes are inappropriate and unsupported by any evidence of inadequate performance.
Theodore turns his fury toward Rodriguez. Angela, you're an academic who studies management theory instead of practicing it. Your perspective comes from case studies and research papers, not real-world experience with high-stakes financial decisions. Maya watches Theodore destroy his relationships with every board member through increasingly desperate attacks. His behavior suggests someone who recognizes his complete isolation but refuses to acknowledge the legitimacy of alternative viewpoints. Rather than engaging in substantive disagreements, he resorts to personal destruction. Theodore, Director Rodriguez published extensively on institutional investor behavior and served on investment committees for 3 major pension funds. Her expertise directly relates to Premier's client base and Aurora's strategic positioning. Maya, you're building a cult of personality around academic credentials instead of focusing on practical execution capabilities. Theodore's voice rises as his control slips further. This entire discussion demonstrates exactly why Aurora needs experienced leadership for major market transactions. The breaking point arrives when Theodore makes his fatal miscalculation. Instead of recognizing his isolation and moderating his approach, he doubles down on personal attacks while revealing his true assessment of Maya's capabilities and rightful role within Aurora. Maya, let's be completely honest about this situation. Theodore straightens to his full height, looking down at Maya with undisguised contempt. You built a nice little minority-owned firm that attracted institutional clients looking for diversity metrics in their vendor relationships. That's commendable community service, but it's not the same as running a major financial institution. Director Williams gasps audibly. Theodore just reduced Aurora's success to affirmative action and tokenism, dismissing Maya's expertise while attributing client relationships to racial considerations rather than performance excellence. The insult encompasses not only Maya, but every client who chose Aurora for legitimate business reasons. Maya feels the insult's impact but maintains professional composure. Theodore revealed his fundamental view of her role and Aurora's success, confirming suspicions that simmered beneath previous disagreements. His comment exposes attitudes that explain his resistance to her strategic vision and leadership decisions. Theodore, Aurora's clients choose our services based on performance results and service quality, not diversity considerations. Our track record speaks for itself through measurable outcomes and client satisfaction metrics. Maya, institutional clients have diversity mandates that influence vendor selection regardless of performance differentials. You've benefited from favorable treatment that created competitive advantages unavailable to traditional firms.
Theodore's words carry unmistakable racial undertones that shock other directors into stunned silence. The accusation strikes at every professional achievement Maya earned through superior preparation, strategic thinking, and exceptional execution. Theodore attributes her success to racial preferences rather than merit, dismissing years of outstanding performance as unearned advantage rather than deserved recognition. Theodore, that analysis misrepresents both Aurora's competitive position and our clients' decision-making processes. Institutional investors prioritize risk-adjusted returns and operational reliability above all other considerations. Maya, you can't honestly believe that race plays no role in Aurora's client acquisition and retention. Progressive institutions want minority-owned vendors in their portfolios, regardless of performance comparisons with established alternatives. Theodore's persistence in pursuing racial explanations for Aurora's success reveals deep-seated prejudices that previously remained hidden beneath professional courtesy. His comments demonstrate fundamental disrespect for Maya's capabilities while insulting clients who supported Aurora based on legitimate business considerations. Director Chen stands again, his face flushed with anger. Theodore, your comments are completely unacceptable. Maya built Aurora through exceptional performance and client service, not through any preferential treatment or diversity considerations. Robert, I'm stating obvious facts that everyone in this room understands but won't acknowledge publicly. Theodore shows no recognition of his behavior's inappropriateness. Maya's a talented professional, but Aurora's growth benefited from institutional advantages that traditional firms don't receive. Maya realizes that Theodore's comments represent his genuine beliefs rather than tactical statements designed to gain negotiating advantage. He truly attributes Aurora's success to racial considerations, explaining his resistance to treating her as an equal strategic partner in major transactions. The moment demands a decisive response that establishes clear boundaries while protecting Aurora's interests and the board's ability to function effectively. Theodore crossed every line of appropriate behavior, revealing attitudes incompatible with Aurora's values and governance requirements. Maya's response comes with surgical precision. She reaches for her phone and activates the recording application with deliberate movements that ensure Theodore notices her actions. Her voice carries new authority as she addresses the room. Theodore, your comments about Aurora's client relationships and my professional qualifications have been recorded and will be transcribed for board minutes. Director Williams, please note the time as 10:47 a.m. for the official record.
Theodore's face drains of color as the implications register. Board meetings create legal records that shareholders and regulators can subpoena during disputes or investigations. His racist characterizations of Aurora's success and Maya's capabilities now exist as documented evidence rather than private accusations. Maya, you can't record confidential board discussions without consent from all directors. Theodore's voice wavers as he recognizes his vulnerability. Board recordings typically require unanimous approval to protect sensitive strategic information from public disclosure. Maya, Aurora's bylaws permit recording when directors engage in conduct potentially harmful to shareholder interests. Your comments questioning my fitness for leadership and attributing our success to racial preferences clearly meet that threshold. Director Rodriguez immediately supports Maya's position. I consent to recording the remainder of this meeting. Theodore's behavior warrants documentation for proper governance oversight. Each remaining director quickly voices consent, isolating Theodore further while protecting themselves from association with his misconduct. The recording creates liability for Theodore while providing legal protection for directors who opposed his statements. Maya opens her laptop and begins typing while speaking. I'm sending immediate notification to Aurora's legal counsel, our auditing firm, and our primary insurance carrier about potential board governance issues requiring review. Our fiduciary insurance specifically covers discrimination claims arising from director conduct.
Theodore realizes that Maya's preparation extends far beyond the premier acquisition. She anticipated potential board conflicts and established procedures to protect Aurora's interests when governance broke down. Her methodical response suggests extensive planning rather than reactive decision-making. Maya, you're overreacting to legitimate strategic disagreements about acquisition planning and execution capabilities. Theodore attempts to reframe his comments as business concerns rather than discriminatory attacks. I never questioned your professional qualifications, only Aurora's readiness for transactions of this magnitude. Director Foster speaks into the recorded silence. Theodore, you specifically stated that Maya built a nice little minority-owned firm that attracted institutional clients looking for diversity metrics. That directly attributes Aurora's success to racial considerations rather than performance excellence. The exact quotation eliminates Theodore's ability to reinterpret his statements. Multiple witnesses heard his characterization of Aurora's client relationships as diversity-driven rather than merit-based, creating irrefutable evidence of discriminatory attitudes affecting his judgment about Maya's leadership capabilities. Maya continues her systematic response while other directors watch in fascination. Our employee handbook requires immediate HR notification when directors engage in conduct that could create hostile work environment liability. I'm copying Aurora's head of human resources on all communications regarding this incident. Theodore recognizes that Maya has transformed his attempted intimidation into comprehensive legal and regulatory exposure. His comments created potential liability under employment discrimination laws, securities regulations governing board conduct, and fiduciary standards that institutional investors require. Maya, I think we should discuss this privately rather than involving external parties in internal board disagreements. Theodore's desperation shows through his sudden preference for confidential resolution after spending an hour attacking Maya publicly before witnesses. Maya, discrimination concerns require transparent handling according to our corporate governance standards. Private resolution protects perpetrators rather than addressing systemic issues that could affect Aurora's reputation and client relationships. Maya's laptop screen reflects her communication with Aurora's crisis management team. Her assistant receives instructions to prepare press statements addressing potential board governance controversies. Media relations specialists begin monitoring financial news platforms for any reports about Aurora's board dynamics. Director Chen observes Maya's comprehensive response with professional admiration. Maya, your documentation procedures demonstrate exactly the kind of systematic thinking that makes Aurora successful. Theodore's characterization of your capabilities appears completely contradicted by your actual performance under pressure. The irony strikes every director simultaneously. Theodore questioned Maya's readiness for complex leadership challenges while she demonstrates superior crisis management skills in real time. His attacks on her competence highlight his own inability to recognize exceptional executive capability. Maya opens her communication with Aurora's largest institutional clients, typing carefully while explaining her actions. I'm notifying our primary client relationships about potential board governance issues that could affect Aurora's strategic direction. Institutional investors require immediate disclosure of material governance risks. Theodore realizes that his behavior threatens Aurora's client relationships in ways that extend far beyond the premier acquisition. Pension funds and endowments maintain strict standards for investment management governance, often requiring immediate review when discrimination concerns arise at portfolio companies. Maya, client notifications could trigger unnecessary alarm about Aurora's stability and leadership continuity. We should resolve internal issues before involving external stakeholders in board dynamics.
Theodore, our fiduciary obligations require transparency about governance risks that could affect client interests. Institutional clients specifically contract for ethical leadership standards that your comments appear to violate. incoming messages from Aurora's legal team acknowledging receipt of her governance notifications. Corporate attorneys begin reviewing applicable laws and regulations while preparing potential response strategies for various escalation scenarios. Director Williams studies Theodore's increasingly desperate attempts to control the situation's trajectory. Theodore, Maya's handling of this crisis demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking and operational capability that Aurora requires for major acquisitions like Premier. The observation highlights Theodore's fundamental miscalculation. His attempt to undermine Maya's leadership credibility instead showcased her exceptional crisis management skills while exposing his own poor judgment and discriminatory attitudes. Maya receives confirmation that Aurora's executive team has initiated formal board governance review procedures. The process includes independent investigation of director conduct, assessment of potential legal exposures, and recommendations for corrective actions required to protect shareholder interests. Theodore, Aurora's Board Governance Committee will conduct a formal review of today's incident according to our established procedures for addressing director misconduct. You'll receive official notification within 24 hours along with requirements for your participation. Theodore faces the complete collapse of his position within Aurora's governance structure. His racist comments eliminated support from fellow directors while creating legal liability that threatens both his personal reputation and Aurora's corporate standing. Maya's strategic response transforms Theodore's attempted intimidation into his own destruction while protecting Aurora's interests through systematic documentation and stakeholder communication. Her preparation anticipated various crisis scenarios and established procedures for maintaining organizational stability when governance failed. The Premier acquisition discussion resumes as Theodore sits in stunned silence, recognizing his complete isolation and potential personal liability for discriminatory conduct that violated both legal standards and Aurora's corporate values. Maya addresses the remaining directors with renewed authority. Given the circumstances that have developed during today's meeting, I recommend proceeding with the Premier acquisition vote while initiating separate board governance review to address the conduct issues we've witnessed. Director Rodriguez immediately seconds the motion. Maya's recommendation protects Aurora's strategic interests while ensuring appropriate accountability for director misconduct that could threaten our institutional relationships and regulatory standing. The vote proceeds with Theodore abstaining, his racist comments having eliminated any credibility for opposing Maya's strategic judgment. The Premier acquisition receives unanimous approval from the 5 directors still capable of objective decision-making. Maya's masterful handling of Theodore's attack demonstrates the leadership capabilities he questioned while exposing his discriminatory attitudes as the real threat to Aurora's success and stakeholder relationships. Within 2 hours of the board meeting's conclusion, Theodore's carefully constructed world begins disintegrating. Maya's systematic documentation triggers cascading consequences across multiple fronts simultaneously. Her assistant delivers the first devastating blow through a simple email notification. Mr. Whitman, Aurora's Board Governance Committee has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Please confirm your attendance for formal review of conduct violations reported during today's meeting. Legal counsel strongly recommended for your protection. Theodore stares at his phone screen in his private office, recognizing that Maya transformed his attack into formal misconduct proceedings with frightening efficiency. The governance committee includes 3 independent directors with impeccable reputations who will evaluate his racist comments against Aurora's ethical standards and legal obligations. His secretary interrupts with urgent news. Mr. Whitman, I have calls holding from the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Bloomberg News. They're asking about reports of board conflicts at Aurora Financial Group. Theodore realizes that someone leaked information about the morning's confrontation to financial media. Maya's client notifications created ripple effects that attracted journalistic attention to Aurora's governance dynamics. Her racist comments could become public knowledge within hours rather than remaining confidential board business.
The first major institutional response arrives before lunch. Whitman Capital, Theodore's primary investment firm, receives notice that the California Public Employees Retirement System is suspending new investments pending review of governance concerns at portfolio companies. CalPERS manages $450 billion in assets and maintains zero tolerance for discrimination at firms receiving pension fund investments. Theodore's CFO enters his office with alarming financial projections. "Sir, if CalPERS triggers similar responses from other institutional investors, we could face redemption requests totaling $180 million within 30 days. Our liquidity position can't handle that level of simultaneous withdrawal." The domino effect accelerates as word spreads through institutional investment networks. The Teacher Retirement System of Texas places Whitman Capital on governance watch status. The New York State Common Retirement Fund initiates formal review of all investments in Theodore's managed entities. University endowments begin questioning their exposure to firms associated with discriminatory leadership. Maya receives confirmation that Aurora's institutional clients are responding exactly as she predicted. Rather than questioning Aurora's stability, they're praising her crisis management and requesting detailed briefings about corporate governance improvements. Her transparent handling of the Theodore situation strengthens rather than threatens client relationships. Pension fund executives recognize that Maya's systematic response demonstrates exactly the kind of ethical leadership they require from investment managers. Her documentation procedures and stakeholder communication protocols prove that Aurora can handle governance crises while protecting client interests and maintaining operational stability. The California State Teachers Retirement System sends a formal letter commending Maya's handling of the board crisis. Aurora's transparent approach to governance violations demonstrates institutional commitment to ethical standards that align with our fiduciary requirements and beneficiary expectations. Theodore watches his influence evaporate across multiple professional networks simultaneously. The Economic Club of New York quietly removes him from upcoming panel discussions about financial industry leadership. The Federal Reserve Bank's Advisory Committee suggests he step down from his position pending resolution of discrimination allegations. His law firm delivers the most devastating assessment during an emergency consultation. Theodore, the recorded statements create significant legal liability under federal employment discrimination laws. Maya's documentation suggests premeditation and systematic planning that courts interpret as evidence of hostile work environment creation. The attorney explains that recorded evidence of racist statements by board members creates corporate liability that insurance companies often refuse to cover. Aurora could face regulatory sanctions, client lawsuits, and reputational damage that Theodore's personal assets might not satisfy if litigation proceeds unfavorably.
Financial markets respond with surgical precision to institutional investor concerns. Whitman Capital's managed funds experienced net outflows of $67 million in the first trading day following news reports about Theodore's comments. High-net-worth clients begin requesting account transfers to avoid association with discriminatory practices. Aurora's stock price initially drops 3% on news of board governance issues, but recovers completely by market close as institutional investors express confidence in Maya's leadership and crisis management capabilities. The contrast with Theodore's firm highlights market recognition of competent versus inadequate executive response to ethical challenges. Maya receives unexpected support from industry leaders who privately experienced similar discrimination but lacked her leverage to respond effectively. The National Association of Securities Professionals issues a public statement praising Aurora's governance procedures and transparent handling of director misconduct. 3 major investment banks contact Maya directly, requesting meetings about potential strategic partnerships that could accelerate Aurora's growth beyond the premier acquisition. Her professional handling of the discrimination crisis demonstrates leadership capabilities that attract rather than repel sophisticated financial partners. Theodore's board positions across multiple companies face immediate scrutiny. directors realize that his Aurora comments reflect attitudes that could create liability for any organization he influences. Corporate governance experts recommend immediate review of Theodore's fitness for continued board service elsewhere. The first resignation demand arrives from Meridian Insurance, where Theodore serves on the audit committee. The board has determined that public statements attributed to you create reputational risks incompatible with our commitment to inclusive leadership and ethical business practices. Theodore's wife calls from their Hamptons estate with disturbing news about social consequences spreading beyond professional networks. Theodore, the country club board wants to meet with us tomorrow about membership review. Apparently, several families complained about discrimination allegations affecting club reputation. The collapse accelerates as legal implications multiply across Theodore's business interests. Employment attorneys representing Aurora staff members begin investigating potential class action claims based on hostile work environment created by board-level discrimination. Federal regulators initiate reviews of companies where Theodore holds leadership positions. Maya implements the next phase of her strategic response by announcing Aurora's new ethical leadership initiative. The program includes enhanced board training, discrimination reporting systems, and partnership preferences for organizations demonstrating inclusive leadership commitments. Major institutional clients immediately endorse the initiative. Theodore's emergency meeting with his core investment team reveals the devastating scope of institutional investor withdrawal. "Sir, we've lost $230 million in managed assets over 3 business days. Prospective clients are citing governance concerns as reasons for selecting alternative investment managers." The financial hemorrhaging extends beyond Theodore's primary business interests. Real estate investments face foreclosure as bank lines of credit get called due to reputational risk clauses. Private equity partnerships vote to remove him from general partner positions to protect fund reputations with institutional limited partners. Maya receives confirmation that the Premier acquisition will proceed ahead of schedule as Premier's management team expresses enthusiasm about partnering with Aurora's ethical leadership approach. The discrimination crisis actually strengthened the strategic relationship by demonstrating Aurora's commitment to inclusive excellence. Theodore's isolation becomes complete when former allies distance themselves to avoid guilt by association. Political connections evaporate as elected officials recognize that supporting discriminatory business leaders creates electoral liability. Professional organizations quietly remove him from leadership positions and speaking opportunities. The final blow arrives through Aurora's legal team notification that the board governance committee unanimously voted to remove Theodore from all positions effective immediately. His Aurora stock holdings face mandatory buyback at depreciated values, reflecting governance risk discounts applied to his shares. Maya's masterful transformation of Theodore's attack into systematic accountability demonstrates that strategic preparation and principled leadership can convert discrimination into competitive advantage while protecting organizational values and stakeholder interests. Theodore's collapse proves that racist attitudes create unsustainable business risks in modern institutional markets. 6 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Maya stands before a packed congressional hearing room as the lead witness in the House Financial Services Committee's investigation into discrimination in institutional finance. Her testimony commands rapt attention from representatives of both parties, who recognize her case as emblematic of broader industry accountability issues. Representatives, the recorded evidence demonstrates how discriminatory attitudes by board members can threaten shareholder value and institutional client relationships, Maya explains to the committee. Theodore Whitman's comments about Aurora's success being driven by diversity mandates rather than performance excellence represent systemic problems requiring regulatory attention. Committee Chair Representative Rebecca Martinez acknowledges Maya's preparation. "Ms. Johnson, your documentation procedures during the board crisis appear to have protected not only Aurora's interests, but also provided evidence for broader industry reform. Can you explain how other firms might implement similar governance safeguards?"
Maya's response outlines the comprehensive framework Aurora developed for addressing board-level discrimination before it escalates into corporate liability. Her recommendations include mandatory recording procedures for contentious board discussions, automatic legal review triggers when directors make discriminatory statements, and immediate stakeholder notification protocols to maintain institutional trust. The committee hearing generates significant media coverage that reinforces Maya's position as a leading voice for ethical leadership in financial services. Major business publications feature her testimony prominently, with the Wall Street Journal headline reading, "Aurora CEO's Congressional Testimony Sets New Standard for Financial Industry Governance." Theodore faces a different congressional experience entirely. Subpoenaed to testify about his role in Aurora's governance crisis, he arrives with an expensive legal team, but little credibility remaining. His attempts to characterize his comments as misunderstood business concerns collapse under questioning from representatives who reviewed the transcripts of his recorded statements. Representative James Wilson confronts Theodore directly. "Mr. Whitman, you stated that Aurora's institutional clients chose the firm because of diversity mandates rather than performance results. Do you maintain that assessment, or do you acknowledge that your characterization was inaccurate and discriminatory?" Theodore's attorney whispers urgent advice, but damage control proves impossible when facing recorded evidence of discriminatory statements. His evasive responses reinforce rather than mitigate perceptions of his inappropriate conduct and poor judgment about Maya's capabilities. The Department of Justice announces a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices at financial institutions, using Theodore's case as a catalyst for examining broader industry patterns. Federal prosecutors indicate that recorded evidence of board-level discrimination creates new precedents for holding executives personally liable for hostile work environment creation. Maya receives validation through Aurora's extraordinary business performance following the governance crisis. The premier acquisition generates immediate synergies that exceed her conservative projections, with combined assets under management reaching $387 billion within the first quarter of integration. Client retention rates surpass 98%, proving that her relationship-focused approach translates successfully to larger-scale operations. Financial analysts who initially questioned Maya's readiness for major acquisitions now cite Aurora's integration success as evidence of exceptional leadership capabilities. The company's stock price reaches all-time highs, generating substantial returns for shareholders who supported Maya during the Theodore crisis. Institutional investors demonstrate their confidence through increased allocations to Aurora's managed funds. The premier public employees retirement system commits an additional $2.3 billion to Aurora's oversight, specifically citing Maya's governance leadership and ethical management standards as factors driving their investment decision. Theodore's legal challenges multiply as federal prosecutors file criminal charges for mail fraud related to discriminatory statements in board communications that cross state lines. Employment discrimination attorneys representing Aurora staff members pursue civil claims based on hostile work environment allegations stemming from his recorded comments. The civil settlement negotiations reveal the devastating financial impact of Theodore's racism. His personal liability exposure exceeds $47 million across multiple lawsuits, while his business interests face additional regulatory fines and compliance costs. Insurance companies refuse coverage for discrimination claims based on recorded evidence of intentional misconduct. Maya announces Aurora's establishment of the Institutional Leadership Institute, a research center dedicated to studying governance best practices and developing training programs for financial industry executives. The initiative receives immediate support from major pension funds and endowments, seeking partners committed to ethical leadership development. Theodore's final board positions disappear as organizations recognize the liability risks associated with his continued involvement. His removal from the Federal Reserve Bank's Advisory Committee eliminates his last connection to financial industry policymaking, completing his professional isolation from institutional finance leadership. Aurora's success attracts partnership opportunities with international financial institutions seeking to expand their North American presence through collaboration with ethically managed firms. Maya negotiates strategic alliances with European asset managers and Canadian pension funds that recognize Aurora's governance standards as competitive advantages in global markets. The industry transformation accelerates as other financial institutions implement governance reforms modeled on Aurora's procedures. The Securities and Exchange Commission publishes new guidance requiring enhanced board training on discrimination prevention and mandating disclosure of governance violations that could affect shareholder interests.
Maya receives the Financial Women's Association Leadership Excellence Award, recognizing her role in advancing both gender and racial equality in institutional finance. Her acceptance speech emphasizes that ethical leadership creates sustainable competitive advantages rather than limiting business opportunities. Theodore's bankruptcy filing reveals the complete scope of his financial collapse. Asset liquidation proceeds failed to satisfy legal judgment obligations, while his professional reputation prevents any possibility of career recovery in financial services. His case becomes a cautionary tale studied in business ethics courses at leading universities.
The Premier integration reaches completion ahead of schedule, with Aurora successfully retaining 99.2% of Premier's institutional clients while achieving operational synergies that reduce combined costs by $127 million annually. Maya's conservative projections prove dramatically understated as the merged entity generates returns exceeding all benchmark comparisons. Congressional legislation inspired by Maya's testimony passes with bipartisan support, creating federal requirements for financial industry governance training and establishing criminal penalties for executives who engage in discriminatory conduct affecting interstate commerce. The Maya-Johnson Act becomes shorthand for accountability standards in institutional finance. Aurora's market capitalization reaches $47 billion as investors recognize the company's sustainable competitive advantages built through ethical leadership and operational excellence. The contrast with Theodore's collapsed empire demonstrates market rewards for principled management versus penalties for discriminatory conduct. Maya testifies before international regulatory bodies about governance best practices, sharing Aurora's framework with financial institutions across Europe and Asia. Her influence extends beyond American markets as global regulators adopt similar standards for preventing board-level discrimination and protecting institutional investor interests. Theodore's attempted comeback through a small regional advisory firm fails when potential clients discover his discrimination history through routine background checks. His professional legacy remains permanently damaged by recorded evidence of racist attitudes that destroyed his credibility with institutional clients, requiring ethical leadership standards. Maya's strategic vision for Aurora continues expanding through careful acquisition planning and organic growth initiatives. The company's success proves that ethical leadership and financial performance create mutually reinforcing advantages rather than competing priorities in modern institutional markets. The final vindication arrives through Aurora's selection as lead manager for a $12 billion state pension fund mandate, the largest single-client relationship in the firm's history. The award specifically cites Maya's governance leadership and crisis management capabilities as factors distinguishing Aurora from competing proposals. Theodore watches Aurora's continued success from forced retirement, his racist comments having caused both personal wealth and professional influence while strengthening the very leader he attempted to undermine. Maya's transformation of his attack into systematic accountability demonstrates that strategic preparation and principled leadership can convert discrimination into competitive advantage while advancing industry-wide ethical standards. 5 years after Theodore Whitman's racist outburst destroyed his career and transformed financial industry governance, Maya Johnson stands at the podium of the Global Economic Forum in Davos, addressing world leaders about sustainable capitalism and ethical leadership. Her presence represents more than personal achievement. Aurora Financial Group has become the template for proving that principled management creates superior long-term value. The audience includes central bank governors, sovereign wealth fund managers, and heads of multinational corporations who implement governance frameworks inspired by Aurora's model. Maya's influence extends across continents as financial institutions recognize that ethical leadership attracts rather than repels institutional capital in modern markets. The Theodore Whitman incident taught us that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's financially catastrophic, Maya explains to the assembled leaders. Organizations that tolerate prejudice systematically destroy shareholder value through talent misallocation, client alienation, and regulatory exposure. Aurora's growth trajectory validates Maya's thesis comprehensively.
The company now manages $847 billion in assets across North America, Europe, and Asia, making it the seventh-largest institutional asset manager globally. More significantly, Aurora maintains the highest client retention rates and risk-adjusted returns in the industry, proving that ethical frameworks enhance rather than constrain financial performance. The Whitman case studies appear in curriculum at Harvard Business School, Wharton, London Business School, and INSEAD. Students analyze how recorded evidence of board-level discrimination triggered cascading consequences that destroyed $15.3 billion in market capitalization across Theodore's business interests while simultaneously strengthening Aurora's competitive position. Professor Elizabeth Harper at Columbia Business School uses the case to demonstrate stakeholder capitalism principles. Maya Johnson's response shows how ethical leadership creates sustainable competitive advantages. Aurora's clients didn't flee during the governance crisis. They increased their allocations because Maya's handling proved the firm's institutional strength. Regulatory frameworks worldwide incorporate lessons from Aurora's governance procedures. The European Union's Corporate Accountability Directive requires real-time documentation of board discussions where discrimination concerns arise. The Bank of England mandates diversity training for all financial institution directors, with annual certification requirements tied to institutional operating licenses. Theodore's personal trajectory serves as a cautionary tale throughout the financial industry. His attempted return through consulting work failed repeatedly as background checks revealed his recorded racist statements. Employment attorneys cite his case when advising executives about personal liability for discriminatory conduct in corporate settings. The social impact extends beyond financial markets into broader corporate governance reform. The Maya Johnson Institute for Ethical Leadership, established with Aurora's charitable foundation funding, trains over 2,000 executives annually on inclusive management practices and discrimination prevention strategies.
Technology companies, healthcare organizations, and manufacturing firms send leadership teams to Maya's institute after recognizing that Aurora's governance model translates across industries. The Institute's certification program becomes a competitive advantage for firms seeking institutional clients and government contracts requiring ethical leadership standards. Maya's influence shapes public policy through her advisory roles with the Federal Reserve, Treasury Department, and Securities and Exchange Commission. Her recommendations about fiduciary standards and governance requirements influence regulations affecting trillions of dollars in managed assets globally. The premier asset management integration, completed successfully despite Theodore's attempted sabotage, demonstrates how principled leadership execution generates superior outcomes compared to aggressive cost-cutting approaches. Aurora retained 99.8% of Premier's clients, while achieving synergies that exceeded Maya's conservative projections by 340%. International recognition follows Aurora's continued success. The Financial Times names Maya Person of the Year in Finance for demonstrating that ethical leadership creates measurable competitive advantages. The World Economic Forum awards Aurora its Sustainable Finance Leadership recognition for proving stakeholder capitalism principles in practice. Theodore's bankruptcy proceedings concluded with personal liability judgments totaling $73 million across multiple discrimination lawsuits. His primary residence, art collection, and investment portfolios were liquidated to satisfy legal obligations, leaving him financially devastated and professionally irrelevant. Maya addresses Harvard Business School's graduating class, sharing lessons about converting adversity into opportunity through strategic preparation and principled response. Theodore Whitman's racism could have destroyed my career if I hadn't documented his behavior systematically and activated our governance procedures immediately. Her speech emphasizes that discrimination creates vulnerability for perpetrators rather than victims when institutional systems support accountability. Theodore thought his position protected him from consequences. He discovered that recorded evidence of racist attitudes creates liability that wealth and connections cannot eliminate. Aurora's mentorship programs support emerging leaders from underrepresented communities across the financial industry. The company's scholarship initiatives fund education for students pursuing careers in institutional asset management, creating pipeline development that addresses historical exclusion patterns.
The firm's diversity metrics reflect sustainable progress rather than tokenism. Aurora's senior leadership includes 47% women and 38% ethnic minorities, percentages that strengthen rather than compromise performance standards. Client surveys consistently rate Aurora's team diversity as a competitive advantage rather than compliance requirement. Maya's strategic vision continues expanding Aurora's global presence through careful market entry and partnership development. The company's recent expansion into sustainable investing and ESG strategies positions Aurora at the forefront of institutional investor priorities for climate-conscious asset management. The contrast with Theodore's collapsed legacy highlights market rewards for ethical leadership versus penalties for discriminatory conduct. Aurora's success attracts top talent who recognize the firm's commitment to merit-based advancement and inclusive culture as career advantages rather than limitations. Maya receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to financial industry reform and economic inclusion. The citation specifically acknowledges her role in demonstrating that ethical leadership creates sustainable competitive advantages while advancing social progress through private sector innovation. Theodore watches Maya's recognition from obscurity, his racist comments having eliminated any possibility of professional rehabilitation or social redemption. His case becomes shorthand for personal accountability consequences when prejudice conflicts with institutional values and legal standards. Aurora announces its acquisition of a European asset manager for $4.2 billion, continuing Maya's strategic expansion into global markets through relationship-based growth rather than aggressive cost-cutting approaches. The transaction reflects Aurora's maturation from regional player to international financial institution. Maya's autobiography, Strategic Principles, Building Sustainable Value Through Ethical Leadership, becomes a bestseller among business leaders seeking frameworks for addressing governance challenges while maintaining competitive performance. Her documentation procedures during the Theodore crisis provide templates for crisis management under pressure. The book's proceeds fund scholarship programs at historically Black colleges and universities, supporting students pursuing careers in finance and business leadership. Maya's commitment to expanding opportunity reflects her belief that diversity strengthens rather than weakens institutional performance. Theodore's attempted memoir, Misunderstood: A Wall Street Leader's Fall, finds no publisher willing to risk association with recorded evidence of racist statements. Literary agents recognize that public sympathy for discrimination perpetrators remains non-existent regardless of personal hardship narratives. Maya addresses the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit about private sector contributions to economic inclusion and social progress. Her presentation demonstrates how Aurora's growth validates stakeholder capitalism as a viable alternative to pure profit maximization strategies.
Aurora's market capitalization reaches $67 billion as investors recognize the company's sustainable competitive advantages built through ethical leadership and operational excellence. The firm's success proves that principled management attracts rather than repels sophisticated capital in modern institutional markets. Maya's legacy extends beyond business success into systemic change that prevents future discrimination while demonstrating profitable approaches to inclusive leadership. Her transformation of Theodore's attack into comprehensive accountability created industry-wide reforms that protect other leaders from similar prejudice. The Theodore Whitman case remains relevant years later because it proved that individual courage combined with strategic preparation can convert discrimination into competitive advantage while advancing broader social progress. Maya's success shows that ethical leadership creates sustainable value that outlasts any particular market cycle or economic condition. Aurora Financial Group stands as living proof that diverse leadership, principled decision-making, and stakeholder-focused strategies generate superior long-term returns compared to traditional approaches that prioritize short-term profits over sustainable value creation.
Maya Johnson's transformation of one man's racism into systematic industry reform demonstrates the power of strategic leadership guided by uncompromising ethical principles.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.